podcast on Mary Queen of Scots, and there usually is a question about Mary Queen of Scots, so make sure we have a good look at this and try and remember as much as you can from what I say here. So Mary was a cousin, okay, so she was the nearest living relative of Elizabeth I, and unfortunately she was the heir to the throne and she was a Catholic. That's how you've got to start off any answer on Mary Queen of Scots. So because Elizabeth I, as we know, was childless, a Catholic queen who then ended up living in England was going to be a huge threat to Elizabeth and the rest of her reign, and obviously at that point she didn't know how much longer she would reign for. So Mary, when she was a child, had been married to the Dauphin of France, so the heir to the throne of France, but actually after 2 years he died, and the French king's death in 1560 was a real turning point in Mary Queen of Scots' life. Because what happened is when she returned to Scotland from France, because really there was no place for her in France anymore once her husband had died, she returned to Scotland, and really it was Protestant, but she was a Catholic queen, so there was going to be a major problem there, and she actually became quite unpopular when she got back there. So she married Lord Darnley as soon as she got back, about a year or so after she got back. And she did this because he was related to Henry VII, so had royal English blood in him. He was incredibly good looking and charming, so who wouldn't want to marry him? And she was completely charmed by him. So what happened was she agreed to marry him, and they had a son called James, okay, who becomes the future James VI of Scotland and James I of England. Now unfortunately, and I won't go into it in too much detail because you all saw the programme on it, he really did terrible domestic violence against her. He beat her, he raped her, he treated her dreadfully, and he was always going out and getting drunk in taverns and things, sleeping with prostitutes. He made her life really a living hell. He really, really did. And the thing about it was, she was getting so unhappy, someone who was one of the Scottish lords, Lord Bothwell, who promised to sort of be a protector, if you like, she spoke to him about possibly getting rid of Lord Darnley because she was so unhappy and she was so frightened of him. So it was suggested she was involved with the murder of her husband, and she'd obviously got involved in a romantic relationship with Lord Bothwell, which obviously was seen, as an issue. So Mary had to flee to England as the Scottish Protestant lords turned to her, okay, so I've turned on her, so that was a problem. So people think she's, killed her husband or been involved in that. She flees because the Protestant lords want her out of Scotland, and they keep a hold of her son James, and obviously she flees to England to try and get some protection. So the Catholic plots in England all started when Mary Queen of Scots obviously arrived in England, and for 19 years she was under house arrest, but was obviously treated extremely well. So she wasn't put in any terrible places to live or anything, but Elizabeth wanted to make sure she could keep an eye on her. So in terms of Elizabeth's treatment of Mary Queen of Scots, in October 1586, Mary was put on trial before 36 noblemen. And this was all due to the fact that she'd become involved in one of the Catholic plots called the Babington plot. So I'm going to go back over the Babington plot here. If you want to look at the thing about Catholic plots, the podcast, that's absolutely fine, but I'll go through what happened. So in terms of it, there was one final plot to try and make Mary Queen of England. She'd been involved in 3 before, but this is the one that could actually pin on her. So a rich, young, devoted Catholic named Anthony Babington came up with a plan to kill Elizabeth. He and 5 men would kill her and then rescue Mary and put her on the throne. Babington managed to get Mary's servants to hide coded letters in beer barrels, and Mary replied saying she agreed with the plan. Walsingham was allowing these letters to go back and forward so he had proof. The code was broken and the message was clear. Mary was involved in the plot. Elizabeth had to have her arrested. There was no choice. Walsingham's plan had worked, and he made Mary's life harder, and she became desperate, so he had the proof he needed. And the Queen of Scots was about to go on trial for her life. So Elizabeth I was really scared about putting her on trial for her life, but basically she knew that really she didn't have any other choice, and Walsingham was really pushing her to have Mary Queen of Scots executed. So as I said before, in October of 1586, Mary goes on trial in front of 36 noblemen, and 2 of these were Cecil and Walsingham. Mary argued a case strongly, and as a foreign queen, she argued she could not be guilty of treason, because as she said, she should be tried in front of a Scottish court, as in those days, Scotland was seen as a separate country. And on the 25th of October 1586, she was sentenced to death. But Elizabeth was scared to have her cousin executed, so she went backwards and forwards about signing a death warrant. And in the end she agreed to sign a death warrant, but only in case there was a foreign invasion, then they would be able to use it. She was really worried that James, Mary's son, or the Spanish might act against her. She was really concerned about that. And she signed the death warrant on the 1st of February 1587. Now Mary was executed on the 8th of February, only a week later at Fotheringhay Castle. And she denied Elizabeth that she knew anything about this. She said she'd only given them permission to use the death warrant if there'd been a foreign invasion. Now Mary had an awful execution. It took 3 blows of the axe. The first one went into the back of her head, then it severed the top of her neck, and then she had a 3rd blow of the axe, and eventually her head came off. And then the executioner held up Mary's head by the wig, and that fell off. It was an absolutely horrific execution. And before she was executed, she stripped down to a red petticoat, because that was the colour of martyrdom. And a martyr was somebody that dies for the cause or for the faith. So she wanted to be known as a Catholic martyr. So if you like, she had the last laugh. Now the consequences for the execution of Mary Queen of Scots were absolutely huge. Here are a few of them. So unfortunately, the enterprise of England, which is what the Spanish had obviously been planning for a number of years, what they decided is that they would use this as an excuse to try and invade England, because obviously she killed a Catholic queen. And if you kill another queen or a king or something like that, it's known as regicide. So because she committed regicide, now nobody was high enough not to be killed. So what ended up happening was that somebody came and invaded England, Elizabeth I could be executed because she'd set that precedent. Another major problem was she was worried about being invaded by Scotland, because James might be very unhappy that his mother's been executed. She actually wrote a letter to James apologising, that she hadn't known anything about it and she was horrified and things like that. James was clever though, because he absolutely knew he would be then the heir to the English throne, so he didn't decide to invade. It wouldn't have been within his interest to do that, so she was concerned about him. She was concerned about all the other Catholic countries, like not just Spain. We're talking about, like Rome, with Italy and things, and France. She was worried about all of these people obviously wanting to attack her because what she'd done to Mary, Queen of Scots. And as well, she knew that there was a problem because she had been the heir to the throne. So obviously the idea of who was going to be heir was thrown open to debate and things again. Who was it going to be? Would it be James? Would it be Arbella, who was, the granddaughter of Bess of Hardwick and things? So in terms of